Demonstrators face off outside the Dade County Courthouse after a court hearing on same-sex marriage. We will hear the pros and cons.
Money maneuvers. Miami-Dade's mayor has a budget challenge and a plan to meet it, and plenty of people are not going to like it.
And a South Florida civil rights pioneer remembers what it was like when the Civil Rights Act was signed into law 50 years ago. Good morning. Glad you could join us on this 4th of July holiday weekend.
We've got some fireworks for you right here. Starting with a state marriage law and a judge deciding whether Florida voters got it wrong. We have a county budget controversy, and later we mark this moment in civil rights history with a woman who really is its living legend.
She certainly is. We're talking about Thelma Gibson of Coconut Grove. We are also going to mosey over to Janine Stanwood's neighborhood, and Janine is going to take us to the Eiffel Tower, yes, the one in Paris, and compare it to another tower that is planned for Miami.
Did we get that trip? Were we on that trip?
Unfortunately, no, we were not.
All right, this morning, though, we begin with love versus law. This week at the Dade County Courthouse, 6 couples asked a judge to pave the way for them to get marriage licenses. Because they are same-sex couples, that is a legal challenge, one in which Elizabeth Schwartz has been heavily involved. She is an attorney based in Miami Beach and so involved in so many matters of same-sex couples and gay marriage and gay adoption, and so we're glad to have you with us this morning.
Elizabeth, good morning. Great to have you here.
Good morning. Thrilled to be here. Thanks.
And we should note here that Alex Alfano, who is an attorney for the Christian Family Coalition, had been invited, said he would come, and within the last hour he called Glenna and said, hey, my clients say they don't want me to appear, but he did send us a lengthy statement.
Christian Family Council is his client, and in an abundance of fairness, before we start, may I just read to you what a little bit of what he had sent us today. The email said, in light of last year's U.S. versus Windsor Supreme Court ruling that states have the, quote, historic and essential authority to regulate marital relations within their borders, and the federal government should not disrespect this authority by ignoring states' marriage laws. And I guess that sets up the case and sets up our discussion today.
All right, so he is citing that famous case, Windsor case before the Supreme Court, and says that rules Judge Sarah Zabel, who is hearing the lawsuit here in Miami-Dade County. Does the Windsor decision limit what she can do?
It doesn't at all. In fact, it greatly dictates what she ought to do, which is find that these bans against same-sex marriage are just impermissible and discriminatory violations of equal protection and due process. It makes the law very clear, as does the 23 decisions, all victories that have come down since Windsor, all of them finding that there is no basis for these marriage bans beyond just pure animus and discrimination.
There has been, I think that people who support same-sex marriage have seen a judicial tidal wave since the Supreme Court ruled against the key provisions of the Defense of Marriage Act. I mean, and it's happened in states where they're very conservative. Virginia, for example, Kentucky, just last week, a Kentucky judge said that their ban on gay marriage is unconstitutional. Are you confident, or do you feel pretty good about what's going to happen in Florida?
We do, absolutely. And I love that you pointed out that Kentucky case. That was such a great one that just came down this past week, appropriately named Love versus Beshear. And in that case, the judge, a Bush, the first appointee, said those arguments are not those of serious people, though it seems almost unnecessary to explain. Here are the reasons why. So I do find it interesting that the opposition didn't want to show up today, because these are not the arguments of serious people.
You know, one of the opposition's arguments, and I feel compelled in an abundance of fairness to really present that side of the story today, is that the courts are not the place for a political or policy argument, but a legal argument. Is this a legal argument, or is it one of policy because it was a popular vote?
This is absolutely a legal argument, and I have to say I cringed a little bit when I heard the love versus law that you started with, because this is not one in opposition to the other. Love is fully in accordance with the law. That is what we have learned over and over again since this Windsor decision came down.
So let me just to be clear, in all those other states, when the judiciary is overturning law, are those statutory laws they're overturning, or voters who put these laws into those states' constitution? Because that's a difference.
Both. All bans have been declared unconstitutional over and over and over again. And what I find so interesting is that some of the arguments that they make are arguments that reasonable people can start to agree with. So, for example, the majority rules argument, that's the big argument, that there was a vote and the majority rules. And certainly we all agree that the majority rules rule is the bedrock of democracy. But the problem is that they're using that rule wrong. The majority rules when it's a rule that...
Wait, what?
Wait, what? Rules there.
If you're gonna pass, let's say the question is, should we all pay more taxes? So if there's a vote on that and the majority votes that we should all pay more taxes, that makes sense because that affects everyone equally. But the majority can't rule to take rights away from the minority. That's why we all moved to this country, and we all moved to this country.
To protect the rights of the minority.
Absolutely,
well,
to not be oppressed by the tyranny of the majority, as our attorney Jeff Cohen said at oral argument, very appropriately so. If this was something that affected everybody equally, then it would stand. But you can't vote on rights of people anyway. That's why they're called rights.
That is the legal argument, the equal protection argument.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, I've got to say that we just saw some video of both opponents and supporters outside the courthouse after the hearing this past week. And in my impression, I was there, I was in court, I was there for the demonstrations. There are some very serious people who support the law in Florida as it now stands. We're looking at pictures, well, those are some of the plaintiffs in the case. You are clients in this case, these 6 couples, and they're very good couples. I have to say you chose well. But, you know, the people who are supporting the ban on same-sex marriage, they see it, a lot of them, as a religious issue, and that it is just offensive to God that people of the same sex should be able to marry. What do you say to them?
I say then they shouldn't marry somebody of the same sex. And certainly the members of their religious institutions shouldn't be forced to officiate at weddings of gay or lesbian couples. And absolutely that is something that when we win this thing will remain the case. No one will be forced to officiate at a same-sex wedding. They're entitled to have their personal beliefs, but they're not entitled to impose those beliefs on others. Yeah. Gay couples have existed, you know, from the beginning of time, will continue to, and all we are asking for is the right to be as respected as any other participating members of society. It's really, on some level, quite a conservative argument to say, hey, listen, these folks want to get, we agree with you, marriage is great, we agree, family is a building block, is the building block of society, and we want to participate in that institution in the same way.
Yeah. You know, worth it to say that there is a parallel case going on. It's a federal case in which there are 8 couples, same-sex couples, who are married and had to go to other states to make that legal, who live in Florida, who are now asking for Florida to recognize legally their legal marriage, because that is also a fight.
Absolutely.
And that's in federal court in Tallahassee, which is where it has to be filed. Elizabeth, let me play you and the folks at home a soundbite from the Deputy Attorney General, who came and represented the state to defend the law. His name is Adam Tenenbaum, and here's what Mr. Tenenbaum said on Tuesday.
Your Honor, the voters in 2008 made a policy decision, which they had a right to do, as to what the definition of marriage should be in the state of Florida. They have that right, and it's not for this court to second guess or make a determination whether that was a good policy or a bad policy.
Well, it's the same argument that you referred to earlier, which is the people have spoken, but they spoke in a way that simply, you are saying, violates the constitutional rights of gays and lesbians.
You can put whatever you want in the Constitution. If the majority votes to put something in the Constitution, it'll pass, but it still has to pass constitutional muster. It still has to be constitutional. So you can get a majority to vote on all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it
I
constitutional.
think
And-
in this state we have. Was it pregnant pigs? Something about pregnant pigs was in the Constitution?
Absolutely. And I swear, as a native Floridian, it makes me crazy that our tax dollars are being used to advance these arguments that have failed time and again in court after court, in state after state, when there is so much else we could be doing with our time and treasure. We have a homeless youth population, 40% of which identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans. And I'm quite sure that many of those folks were thrown out by maybe supporters of the marriage ban.
Let me ask you this.
Please.
I know you probably have done your homework on the judge, Sarah Zabel, who is overseeing this case. What do you see in her background, in her prior rulings and opinions that may lead you to sort of predict what she might do in this case?
Well, lawyers do not read the tea leaves on cases as well as Wednesday went, and it really did go very, very well.
But Elizabeth, her questioning, and it's always difficult and probably wrong to interpret where a judge is going from the questioning, but her questions seem to indicate she's read all of these 21 or so rulings.
She's
23.
definitely done her homework. She seemed very, I think, impressed with the court rulings for the repeals of marriage bans.
Yeah, she knows what other judges have said.
Absolutely. I think she's ready to follow the law. I mean, that's to me what's so interesting about some of these cases is that it's really not been about the judge's personal beliefs as much as it's been about them It should be about them following the law. So, for example, in the Michigan case, a Reagan appointee absolutely destroyed the Regeneris study, which was the scholarship that was relied on by our opponents last week. And this was a judge who's a pretty conservative guy, but who sees that the dignity of couples is at stake here, the dignity of gay and lesbian individuals and couples and families and our right to self-determination.
Yeah.
On that note, we are going to be taking this up on the roundtable.
We will in just a minute. Elizabeth Schwartz, always great to have you come.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will be on tenterhooks, as you will, until Judge Sarah Zabel rules.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we are going to take this and other big headlines of the week to our roundtable.
Stay with us. Welcome back. This holiday week was a busy one, and it had a theme: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the headlines, the Civil Rights Act that marks 50 years now, and the legal debate over same-sex marriage that some call the civil rights fight of our time.
So let's get some input on those and other topics from our Powerhouse Roundtable. With us today are James Griffin, a Broward-born and raised middle school principal who was named Florida's Principal of the Year a few years ago, and he was honored recently with the African American Achiever Award. Steve Rothhaus is a veteran South Florida journalist and columnist for the Miami Herald who covers LGBTQ issues for the Miami Herald. I have learned to say Q as well, Steve.
Thank you.
He's a man of the millennium.
Oh, yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for coming in, James, Steve. Great to see you. Steve, you were in court this week. We spoke up there in the courthouse. We asked Elizabeth Schwartz to give us her sense of where the judge may be going. Do you have any sense of, what Sarah Zabel may do?
Well, of course, as Liz said, that you can't read the tea leaves. However, it appears that Judge Zabel is likely to rule with the plaintiffs. It appears that, based upon the kinds of questions that she was asking, and also in my speaking with some of the defendants and the friends of the case who are prepared to go to the next level because they believe that she probably will rule with the plaintiffs.
Yeah. Well, and we should point out, as I think Lena mentioned earlier, whatever happens, whichever way Judge Zabel rules, there's going to be an appeal to the 3rd District Court of Appeal and eventually probably to the Florida Supreme Court. If they grant cert and hear the case, they, in fact, may not,
well,
if they're asked to.
Absolutely, and there's another case in Monroe County, which mirrors the case in Dade County.
Hearing is tomorrow morning.
That hearing is tomorrow morning in Plantation Key, and there will be, instead of 6 plaintiff couples, there'll be 1 plaintiff couple. They are gay bartenders in Key West who would like to marry. They've been together about 11 years, and they are suing for the right to marry, just as these 6 couples are suing.
Yeah. James Griffin, so good to have you here, Principal of the Year, educator, and
first timer on the roundtable.
We're glad to have you on the roundtable. This comparison between the fight of the gay lesbian community for the same rights that heterosexuals have has been compared many times to the civil rights fights. Well, I'm old enough to remember, and I know people who took part in the 1960s marches, marched a little bit myself, and I know some black people who say, I'm offended by that. I mean, our fight was different. I mean, we put our lives on the line, and I sympathize with gay people, but it's nothing like it. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that you have people that have personal, like you said, you're old enough to remember some of those things, where I'm just old enough to have read some of those things in history.
Right.
I think that the government always intervene in a lot of things. When you go back and look at the things that happened in the civil rights movement in '64, what we find out is that the government had intervened. A lot of those laws were still on the books in Amendment 13, 14, and 15. And what the government was able to do with the civil rights is to come back and say, hey, these are the things that need to be done to enforce those things. From an educational standpoint, I like to say that everything you learn in kindergarten. So the civil rights movement taught us how to play in the box, in the kindergarten sandbox. And I think what has happened as we look at the civil rights movement, what we found out is that there are many people, we've actually took a lot of goals, but we've missed the vision of the civil rights movement. That's what I would say with those people. I think the vision is teach us all how to play together in the sandbox. So yeah, we're now working together. We are staying next to each other. We're going to restaurants together, blacks and whites. But of locals being able to work together, as it is with gay issues, as with education issues, as it with access to technology and internet. I think it's about us all coming together and solving our own issues without so much government influence.
Yeah.
You say you are not old enough to be there, but you know people, but you are old enough to have seen the effects of not only the act, but know what the effects are supposed to be and perhaps not see some of those.
Right.
Tell me about those.
And I actually see, when you follow some of them, I think Broward County school system has done a great job with the Gay and Lesbian Act. We're doing some great things with the state and also nationally. We also have moved to a group called Glaskin, which is helping people, homosexuals, in the workplace. and how they're dealing with those things. So I think that when you go across the country and you look at what's happening to gays across the country, they are going through some similar things from hate acts and hate crimes, and a lot of things are going on. So it's very serious what's happening. I think that we can't turn our eye to it. I think going back to the Civil Rights Act, I think is the ability for us to be able to see that we're all people, we're all united, and it's about enjoying the American dream.
Yeah. You know, to both of you, let me just simply say, I certainly lived through, you were both very young, but, you know, the era of forced busing, as many called it there, where as a remedy for the segregated schools, children were bused all over. They were
Called it integration. It was a
yeah,
name
I
for
mean, it was part of integration. It certainly happened here in South Florida, happened all over the country. But studies have shown, James, that over the last couple of years, several years, communities have become self-segregating, and the number of all black schools, or virtually all black schools, or all white schools, is as high as it's ever been. I mean, that's not a good thing.
I think we have to also remember that schools are a beacon of the community, so the community is going to be a mirror of what's in that particular community. So I think as the Civil Rights Act allowed us to progress, we forgot the process. And we're looking at the process, we have to begin to look at what's happening in schools, and the schools ultimately affect what happens with employability rates. And when you look at the employability rates, that tells you how you're going to purchase certain homes. And that's how you begin to segregate certain things. We had magnet schools, if you go back about 30 years, that helped integrate schools. And now we're back to...
And they still do.
And they still do. Although when you look at the statistics and the data of a lot of those magnet schools, you're starting to see they're becoming segregated also. And Time Magazine actually spoke about that in one of the issues probably about 20 years ago when I was in high school. I can remember that. So I think in order to make things better, you have to make schools better. And when you make schools better, then people integrate. They'll come where schools are better. So I think that's the challenge ahead of us. And then I think that will solve a lot of those particular issues.
I just wanted to bring up that Broward County schools, they lead the nation really in terms of training and education in terms of LGBT issues.
How so? That's interesting.
Well, last year I did a story about a training manual that was developed by the school board with the support of Superintendent Runcie, that basically is a manual, a guide to teachers on how to interact and how to deal with the problems of LGBT youth.
So it's like a sensitivity training.
It goes beyond that, actually, because this is something that is actually, you know, to be used in the classroom, but in terms of, for instance, how to speak to children who are bullying other children.
Is that in Miami-Dade as well, do you know?
They have a similar program, but nothing as extensive as in Broward. They do have, you know, training in Dade County schools, but Broward actually put together a manual that was with the help of other school districts around the country and introduced it last year.
And Steve, I have to point out that you have been at the Herald, I don't know how many, 25, 30 years?
Close to 29 years.
All right, so a long time, and I think that it's admirable that the Herald has recognized your talents and given you a beat. I don't know how many other newspapers or media in this country have somebody who is covering these issues, but you know, more power to the Herald to allow you to do it.
No other mainstream newspapers in the United States, mainstream newspapers, have a reporter who covers a dedicated LGBT beat. And you know, that's something that I know firsthand through my work with the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, through the Unity Journalists Group, through the NLGJA, which is the Gay Journalists Group. We produced a film earlier this year about the history of gay rights called The Day That It Snowed in Miami. And it's a history of gay rights.
It's an excellent documentary.
Yes,
Thanks.
well done.
Thank you very much. It's seen through the eyes of Dade County, beginning with the Anita Bryant era, taking us to today. And you know, when we debuted the film, you know, I verified then that I am the only person who does this. And you know, for better or worse, this is something that obviously other cities. Thank you.
No, I'm glad you are. James, you are headquartered, live in Broward County, but let me ask you something. I've met a charter school principal the other day at it was at a political event down in Overtown, and he pointed out to me in a private conversation, I'm not going to give his name, He said along this corridor, 7th Avenue up 441, from Overtown through Liberty City all the way up to what used to be Carroll City and now is Miami Gardens, he said over the last 50 years, $1 billion or so has been spent to improve the lives of African Americans who live in these neighborhoods, go to these schools, try to get employed, and he said it hasn't done that much.
I'll tell you, Mike, that question comes up quite a few times, and the School Board of Broward County is actually addressing all those issues. I think what you also have to come back and look at is where's the leadership? A lot of people will calculate the funds, they'll calculate the money, but then you have to question where's the leadership and what's the accountability for those dollars.
All right, well, I'm afraid on that note, and it's a question we need to pursue, but we are out of time. So, James, thanks very much. Steve, great to see you.
Thank you, Mike.
Great to have you, and thanks so much.
All right, when we come back, I will sit down with Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez. He is about to unveil his budget for the coming fiscal year.
And it is already controversial. You'll hear why the mayor thinks it's the only way to go when we come back.
One of Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez's most important tasks is preparing a budget to run county government. It has been especially hard for him to do it this time because the government started out in the hole, a $208 million hole. So I went to County Hall this week to find out how the mayor is going to make up that deficit and whether it will mean job cuts and fewer county services. Mayor Jimenez, you've been working on your budget now for a couple of months. You're going to release it in a few days. It's gone through several iterations, a work in progress, but you've always said there will not be a tax increase. Is there a tax increase on the budget?
No, there will not be a tax increase.
But the library millage may go up a little bit.
Well, there will not be an overall tax increase. It's very similar to what we did in fiscal year 11-12. We may move some millages around, but the overall number will not increase. And so we're looking at a way to increase the library millage, but decrease other millages to compensate for it in order to make sure that all libraries are open. They're open the same number of days, the same number of hours.
but with fewer employees.
With fewer employees. We've had a pretty major budget crunch. We are developing this budget under a worst case scenario, anticipating no concessions from the unions, anticipating no concessions in terms of our cost for health insurance, which is extremely high. And so with that, when you hear these numbers of people that we may have to lay off, it is taking in consideration the worst case scenario. We're down to about $65 million. We had it from
You started
208.
at 206 million.
Right. We had it at 208 million.
208.
Yeah, and we're down to about 65 million, which now the 65 million means direct services. This is where the rubber meets the road and where some of these cuts are going to be a little painful.
All right. Well, some of the pain is going to be in the Miami-Dade Police Department. You are looking at cutting roughly, what, 255 police officers?
We're down to about 230. But the one thing I did tell the directors that I wanted no patrol officers to be, we're going to have the same number of patrol officers on the street. No specialized units are going to be disbanded. You're going to have fewer people in some of those specialized units.
Like robbery intervention detail,
but there'll still
narcotics.
They'll still be in operation. They'll have fewer people in them. We'll also have people that were behind desks, people that were supervising folks that no longer need to be supervised. They need to go back on the street. And so that's how we're handling that. Again, Michael, that's all, at the end it'll be up to, there's a couple of things. If the commission doesn't raise the taxes, which I hope they don't because I'm not going to propose it, and then if the unions don't come to the table with some concessions, then it's really going to be how many people are laid off is going to really be up to them.
All right. Well, you started with a possibility of 700 layoffs.
Yes.
But you've kept cutting that down, but there's still, how many people theoretically would be laid off?
Well, there were more than 700. I mean, theoretically now, under worst case scenario, now that we're down to about $65 million, we're about close to 800 people may be laid off. Again, that'll all, at the end, will be dictated by the concessions that we can negotiate with the unions.
Yeah, and you had at one point said, I'm going to ask all county employees to give us a 10% pay cut. Then you pulled back on that and you said, I want benefit concessions on health. What are the concessions you want?
Well, we have, in the contracts right now, there are concessions that the employees have given us for the last 3 years. Now, mind you, the employees have already received 9% back in terms of at least their health care contributions. That's eliminated. So they've gotten at least a 9% raise in the last 2 years. Yeah. But there are some other concessions that remain, but they are scheduled to end October 1st. What I'm asking is that we extend those concessions. In other words, I'm not asking to take any more from the paycheck, and that the unions work with the administration to reduce the cost of health care by 15% simply by a plan redesign. And there are a number of ways that we can reduce our extraordinary costs in health care that will not hurt the employee, that will give them excellent health care. But we really have, and I've said it over and over again, we have a Rolls-Royce plan. I mean, we really need to get down to much more conservative.
Plan.
A Chevy, I mean, it could even be a Cadillac, all right? But it can't be a Rolls-Royce. Right now, we pay over $400 million in health care.
I saw the other day that there are a number of policies that are in place that have been in place for a while about 3 bus drivers could be paid while only 1 drives a bus. Other really just outrageous kinds of policies that are in effect. I mean, how can these go on?
They can't, and that's why also part of the concessions or the negotiations are, these are management rights that were given away a long time ago.
By the commission? Or
by the commission and by previous administrations. There were management rights that were given away a long time ago, and the unions are going to say, yes, we gave up something for those concessions. But they don't, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And so those things that don't make sense from a management perspective, we're going to be asking to roll them back and to get some kind of semblance of sanity in the way that we run our government. Look, for me it is service over self.
Let me ask you about David Beckham and his soccer stadium. Just a few months ago, with your support and the support of Miami Mayor Tomas Regalado and a lot of other people, business leaders, civic leaders, there was a huge amount of excitement about Beckham and his group building this $250 million soccer stadium, and now it looks like it's sort of on life support. Is it?
It's up to Mr. Beckham. His representatives came to see me about 2-3 weeks ago. Said they're going to take about 60 to 90 days to reevaluate everything. You know, we were working toward a possibility of a stadium at the port, which I thought was a very viable alternative. Unfortunately, a company put out a lot of money to really kind of poison the well with misinformation.
Richard Fain and Royal Caribbean.
And they did, and they poisoned the well with a lot of misinformation. And so the commission decided that they didn't want to do the port anymore. Well, we looked at another place, which was the slip, filling in the slip, creating more parkland, and maybe the stadium could go there. Originally had, you know, support of the Miami mayor and some commissioners, and then they decided that it wasn't a good enough deal for them, so they told them no. The Beckham Group still wants to be in Miami. They still want to be somewhere in downtown. There is no other government land downtown, and so they have to do their due diligence of what it is they want to do, where it is they want to do it.
Yeah. Do you have an idea for a site?
There were some other sites that I you know, kind of posed them and said, here's a possibility, here's a possibility, but a lot of that is privately owned, and the prices here, especially downtown, are skyrocketing, and so, you know, to actually go out outright and buy the land is going to be very expensive. They could get a deal from us because we could lease the land, you know, on a long-term basis. But you know, that seems like it's not going to happen now. So it's up to them. They still want to be in Miami-Dade County. And so I'm waiting for them to tell me what it is they want to do. I told them I was more than willing to help them. I think it'd be great. I think the Beckham brand, and also Major League Soccer, I mean, with the excitement of the World Cup recently, you know, this town really wants soccer, and we deserve a world-class soccer stadium with a world-class team, which I think Mr. Beckham will bring, but, you know, it's in his hands right now.
I need to ask you a strictly political question before we run out of time. You hold a nonpartisan office. You're not elected as a Republican or Democrat, but you are a registered Republican. Has Governor Scott approached you and said, hey, Mayor Jimenez, endorse me? And what'd you say to him?
Yeah, he has. And I will tell you that Governor Scott, every time I've called, has been responsive. I do credit him a lot with a lot of the job creation that we have here in this county. We've had very good job creation in this county. We're very much synced up on creating jobs is our mantra. Diversifying the economy is mine here in Miami-Dade County. That's what I want to do as the mayor, continue to do as the mayor. And so, you know, what I've said is, you know, you have been a straight-up person, and when the time comes, you know, I'll be considering it. But yeah, he's asked.
Mm-hmm. Charlie Crist?
No, he hasn't. Charlie Crist has not asked me to endorse him. I know the former governor, but he hasn't called and asked me to endorse him.
All right. Finally, you having any fun doing this?
Yeah, I actually do. I have fun doing this because I get a kick out of solving problems. And you know, we started out with a $208 million problem. Now it's down to 65, but it's a problem, and we're going to fix it. And I want to get Miami-Dade County on the right track. I want to make sure we have a sustainable budget. I want a job creation in this county. I love what we're doing with startups. I love what we're doing with incentivizing, you know, the Emerge Americas conference. You know, I finally got the deals with those stadiums done so that we don't have to worry about it for a long time. Right-sizing this government, moving it forward, creating confidence, and yeah, I'm having fun doing that. And you know, I want to create a legacy where at the end people say, you know, Miami-Dade County was a better place. He left it in better condition than when he got it, and here's the proof.
Mr. Mayor, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And Mayor Jimenez will formally unveil his proposed budget on Tuesday. All right, coming up, a South Florida civil rights pioneer reflects on what it was like here in 1964 when the Civil Rights Bill became law.
Thelma Gibson was the first African-American nurse to work at a South Florida hospital, and that is just the beginning. You'll meet her coming up next.
This week marked the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and we are hearing from the lady whom you see here, a civil rights pioneer in South Florida. Thelma Gibson was a nurse in South Florida at the time that law was enacted.
And now, a half century after, she is a living role model of that history who knows there is much more to do. Todd Tongen visited Ms. Gibson this week.
Mama always said to us, you don't let nobody keep you down.
87-year-old Thelma Gibson is one of South Florida's civil rights pioneers, and she will never forget that fateful day 50 years ago when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
I was on duty as a public health nurse on the day that the Civil Rights Bill was signed.
And did you rejoice?
Oh, did we all? We clapped and we danced.
Thelma was 37 years old when the bill was signed, and she says it was a turning point for not just African Americans, but women as well.
I lived under much different rules, and I lived here in Coconut Grove. We had Colored Town and White Town.
In 1947, Thelma Gibson became a registered nurse, specializing in operating techniques. So she applied for a job at Jackson Memorial Hospital. It appeared her future was bright, but not as bright if she had been white.
When I was turned down for working in the operating room at Jackson Hospital, I knew I had to work. And so I went to work on the colored floors and was able to make a living.
Undeterred, Thelma went on to get her BS degree in nursing education. For a time, she was a City of Miami commissioner and has too many accolades to list. But just blocks from her Coconut Grove home, the Thelma Gibson Health Initiative helps those that need it the most in her community.
Struggle continues. We have to continue to fight for the rights of everybody, because while the laws are on the books, it isn't easy for some people. And I think that this is what America should be saying to all young people today. If you work hard, you can achieve.
For This Week in South Florida, Todd Tongen.
What a remarkable person she is. I'm proud to say she is a friend of mine, and in fact her late husband, Father Theodore Gibson, was too.
A treasure and such a cool woman. I mean, aside from being, honest to God, to talk to this woman is so much fun.
Yeah, hard to believe she's 87, and Thelma, if you are watching, we love you.
I want it on the round table. That's a good idea.
All right.
Up next, we're taking you to Stanwood's neighborhood, and this time, you gotta have a passport to get there. You see this tower and you know just what it is, you know where it is, you may even know why it is, and you may know there are plans for another kind of signature tower right here in South Florida, whose developers have compared it to the Eiffel Tower.
And that brings us to Janine Stanwood's neighborhood. This week, Janine really went far afield, all the way to Paris, where she toured the Eiffel Tower with an eye toward the skyscraper planned for downtown Miami.
Skyrise, this gleaming observation tower on Biscayne Bay, has been called a lot of things. Developers say if it's built, it will be the Eiffel Tower of Miami.
And so this week's edition of Stanwood's Neighborhood takes us to Paris, France, home of the Eiffel Tower.
We wanted to know what people here think of the comparison.
The people who probably have the most opinions are the people who work here. C'est bon? Magnifique. Do you think it could ever be as unique as the Eiffel Tower?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Because the Eiffel Tower is old, so
There's history behind it. Maybe one day this?
No, this is like Dubai, you know? It's like the new big building, but no history behind it.
No history. What do you think? Do you think it's
the same? Well, I don't think so. I'm sorry.
You don't think so?
No.
And why is that?
I don't know, because Eiffel Tower has a real story regarding the war, the First World War. If the Eiffel Tower is still aware, that's because there was the First World War.
What do you think?
Weird.
Weird.
Yeah.
So while it may be interesting to note what the people of Paris think about Skyrise, what really matters is
What the people of Miami think. Voters will get to weigh in on whether or not it's built in August. Until then, au revoir.
in the neighborhood. I'm Janine Stanwood for This Week in South Florida.
Oh, c'est si bon.
I told Janine she's officially the only other person I know who works on vacation also.
That's right. And I think the video shot with an iPad and an iPhone was by her husband, Michael Freilich, who is an ace producer here at Local 10 News.
We're all over it.
Yeah.
They're back, by the way.
Oh, good.
Still to come, in honor of our nation's independence, could you pass the test to become a U.S. citizen? Would you be surprised to know a lot of Americans would not? Pop quiz when we come back.
live look from our Fort Lauderdale tower cam of a very stormy looking sky.
It does not look good. Here's meteorologist Roland Stedham with your Sunday forecast.
Hi, everybody. Well, it looks like our weather pattern has been fairly predictable here around South Florida. Yesterday, we had this little disturbance that helped to kick off some showers and storms. We're still on the tail end of that disturbance, and we're seeing a moist southeasterly flow. What that means is that while we have passing showers during the first part of the day, chances are with the heating of the day, we're going to be seeing some scattered thunderstorms developing around some of the inland areas once again. If you're planning on going out on the water, east-southeasterly winds at 10 knots. Seas are going to be nice and flat, running about 1 to 2 feet for the Keys and also for Dade and Broward County coastal waters. The high temperatures today will manage to finally get up to around 90 degrees around 3 o'clock this afternoon, passing showers or storms, and then the potential for showers will begin to taper off later on this evening. My 7-day forecast, high temperatures each day will be approaching 90 degrees with that mixture of sunshine and clouds anticipated. Maybe a few showers in the morning, but you know what will happen, a scattering of thunderstorms expected each afternoon. Have a great Sunday.
Who's shocked by that? Thank you, Roland. Before we go out in pursuit of happiness today, in honor of our nation's birthday weekend, here's a little pop quiz for you. Okay, how many Americans do you think would be able to earn their citizenship if they had to by passing the actual U.S. citizenship exam? The answer may surprise you, or maybe it won't surprise you. The test has 100 questions. Some are pretty basic, Civics 101, some gimmies in there. Some are more thoughtful questions about citizens' rights and responsibilities, how government works, how law works. Generally, now in schools, civics is not a priority anymore. It has no high-stakes place on the FCAT nor the Common Core. It's not one of the STEM subjects, science, math, technology. But think about how critical civic literacy is to vote, to pick leaders, to hold the ones we choose accountable for making decisions. You can't run a company unless you know how the business works. So how can we, the people, run government if we don't know how it works? According to the U.S. Immigration Service, 9 out of 10 immigrants do pass the test. Granted, they have a chance to study up for it. As for Americans by birth, you want to guess? 65% pass rate, according to a recent study. More than a third of native-born Americans could not pass the test to become a citizen. Could you? Right on our website, local10.com, we have a link to those 100 questions. Click on the News tab, look under Politics section, see how you do, and let us know. And of course, we invite you to weigh in on anything you like. Email, Facebook, Twitter, any of the addresses. We are so easy to find.
We are, and we hope you contact us, and I think I'll go and take that test myself.
You'll pass.
I think
You're
I'm
gonna
going to pass. Okay. Hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
Have a good one.